Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everyone to the AI 2030 show. My name is Xiaochen Zhang, the CEO of FinTech for Good, and also the host of this show. And today I have a very good friend of mine who is with us. And Marianne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, definitely. No, thank you so much for this invitation, Xiaochen. So we've been part of the same community of FinTech for Impact or Good for quite a while. And I've definitely worked most on the green pillar of the ESG, so the environment and climate. And now I'm really working on nature-related risks and opportunities for finance as part of the task force for nature-related financial disclosures. And I also do work with a global canopy, mainly on deforestation risks. And of course, AI is sort of at the center or starting to be at the center. That's what we're going to discuss of some of that work.
Perfect. Yeah, so we have known each other for a long time, and so probably before we talk about our AI related work, and maybe you can just share with us what have you seen in green finance and also nature-based financing, and then what is the current landscape, and why this topic is so important.
Yeah. Oh, definitely be happy to. So, I mean, green finance has gone from really being quite niche and exotic, right, to really becoming mainstream, and especially being pushed through regulators, especially in the EU, where we have the most aggressive regulators. And now a lot of the big fund managers, but also banks, etc., are subject to mandatory disclosure on their nature-related and climate-related financial risks and opportunities. So that's really been sort of from niche to mainstream where we are today. But then when we look at technology and AI, then that transformation of finance with AI, big data, artificial intelligence has started to play a significant role for quite some time now in the financial system, right? But really what we saw for many years in parallel in the same financial companies where you had AI changing everything from front to back office was that you still had very handheld sustainability functions. So AI and computer-driven assessments of financial data is sort of the new normal, where you had sort of human-led assessment of nature and climate-related risks for quite a long time, actually, in finance. And this was due to the fact that it's quite complicated, or at least it was a few years ago, to deploy AI on sustainability data because of the format and it comes in. Sustainability data has been very unstructured data. So a lot of the disclosure data on sustainability has been qualitative and narrative. So you found sort of information on climate footprint in infographics or in footnotes, and it's been very narrative. So therefore, really what we saw was the first wave of AI being applied in sustainable finance was really using AI for sentiment data gathering. So basically leveraging the natural language processing capabilities of AI to web troll or to troll the internet to pick up sentiments on social media and on news automatically about companies, linking news to company behaviors. So was that a positive, neutral, or negative report coming out about a company's sustainability behavior, and then linking that into ESG scoring? So that was for a while what was happening. But now what has started to change is that really we have much more regulatory pressure. So we have quantitative metrics that are being issued now. We have the SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation in the EU. We have the taxonomies, etc., coming to market, and they are shifting the types of data that companies and FIs need to bring to market from qualitative descriptions of what they're doing to really what's your quantitative emissions that you're financing, what's your emissions to water, what's your plastic pollution footprints in quantities, etc. So we're getting the standards right now, and they're getting quantitative and they're getting mandatory. And what the EU is also doing, which is so helpful for deploying AI, so I think that's going to come much more for automatic analysis of the disclosures, is they have this single access point regulation, which is basically a database where all the disclosures are going to be hosted, and it's going to be in machine readable format. So that's going to be extremely helpful, just as you have at the SEC, that's also in XBRL format, right? So you can run AI on it. So regulators have listened that we really need more of the sustainability data chains to behave the same way and be structured in the same way as financial data. It needs to be quantitative and it needs to be machine readable. So that's where we are. And then I think a parallel, sort of the third development that FIs are starting to sort of dip their toe in the water is that we are having more and more open source data and cheaper data, so satellite data, censored data, Earth observation data, that we are having more sort of the Sentinel-2 data from the European Space Agency, but also Landsat data from NASA that's being put out in massive data repositories. So we're having quite a lot of fintechs that are trying to analyze, using AI to analyze deforestation footprints of assets, etc., leveraging these types of data. But that's extremely early days. So I think we're going to expect to see much more of that to come.
Excellent. That's you already just brought into this whole picture, and I think what you shared is quite important, where that regulators play a very important role to set a framework right, and then from the company side or business side or the financier side, that's do they see the forest or the ocean or the climate data or the problem from different ecosystem service? Do we face the same data related challenge, or just from ocean problem is different from the forest problem, different from the more so do you see more similarity, or do you see a lot differences?
Well, quite a lot of differences. I mean, at least you can get AI to automatically. The good thing about forest is that you can see the canopy, right? And you can get AI to analyze historical data sets using open source data to see changes in canopy and pick that up. You don't need very high resolution to see changes in canopy cover. So that's why we have seen quite a lot of AI applications to offer a portfolio manager just to understand their deforestation risk exposure using satellite data on specific assets. So that's definitely the most mature data set and the most sort of automation ready, you could say. Then when we look at some of the metrics coming out of SFDR and also of the TNFD, then a really key one for the financial sector is that you are now going to be able to measure and disclose the share of investments in investee companies with sites or operations located in or near biodiversity sensitive areas, and where these activities that are financed have a negative impact on these areas. So financial service institutions need to start to understand their land footprint and what part of that land footprint they are financing is close to biodiversity sensitive areas. And biodiversity sensitive areas, that's going to increase quite a lot because we now have a global agreement on nature, and all the states, except for the US, actually, they're not part of the convention, they've signed up to increasing the size of protected areas to 30%. So a lot more are going to be exposed to this metric. So, I mean, if you are an FI and you know where your investments are, so you're into project finance, for instance, then you can go into, there are quite some good tools. Then you can go into what's called the IBAT, and you can put in your geolocation, and you can get a proximity report. What's the proximity to sensitive areas in a radius? And also, where are you threatening red listed species with your investment? So there you can get pretty good data, but you need the geolocation of the asset. And I think that's the problem, right? For most asset managers and asset owners, if you're into listed equities, you won't know the whole footprint of that company, and especially not of its supply chain, right? So there are definitely some challenges when we move out of project finance. So then I spent quite some time looking at the ocean, because the ocean is, of course, covering the largest part of our wonderful planet. And what is really interesting, and I think sort of a message across, is that some of the automated data points that we have used to track elements on the ocean, or physical assets on the ocean for other purposes, we can certainly use to also report on some of these metrics. So one of the things we looked at was that all vessels, according to regulation, all vessels above a certain size, they need to have installed what's called automatic identification system, which is basically where they send messages to satellites or land receivers on where the vessel is. So you can track all the routes automatically of all the large shipping fleets of the world. And there we work with something called Xiaochen in Norway. And what they have done is that they have designed an algorithm where they have the data feed has been from this AIS on ships, which is tracking their routes and also their speed. And then also going into ship registries to draw out physical parameter data on the ship, how old is it, what type of engine, etc. And then it's been able to automatically generate a carbon footprint on all these vessels. So what we looked at was like, how can we repurpose some of that data for climate, also for this metric on proximity to biodiversity sensitive areas? So basically what we did was to overlay the shipping routes with the marine protected zones, and thereby we could get the AI to track how long a company is having their vessels stay in marine protected areas, and what are they emitting in terms of noise pollution, in terms of NOx and SOx pollution, etc. So that's just one way of that you can mine your climate data and really think about how to repurpose it to also be able to report on some of these disclosure metrics. So you don't have to reinvent the whole wheel. I mean, an AI can help you.
And when you just described, the tools are much more ready than before. And who consume the tools? And are they the regulators, or are they the company themselves, or is that the public who are going to use that data? And what kind of actions that you expect them to take when they just understand the pollution from sound or the carbon emission, and who mostly are the users of these AI tools?
Yeah, I think those that, of course, are subject to this regulatory pressure. So we saw that of course, the asset managers, asset owners in France, they were the first to disclose on biodiversity footprints because it was mandated by the government. And I think now those that are headquartered or marketing to European clients, they need to disclose on the SFDR. So that's one of the metrics, is how long do you spend, or how close are you to marine protected areas or protected areas on land. So I think that's mandatory. So they have to disclose on that. I think what is, and then I think probably some of the impact investors would also, the private funds would probably also be quite interested in understanding some of these risks, to be able to do sort of biodiversity screened or thematic type funds, where they can do sort of blue engagement funds, for instance, where they can set KPIs on how they're then shifting the amount of time that they're spending in marine protected areas, so they can have a thematic fund that focus on that impact area. So I think definitely those that are in the regulated spaces. I think one challenge is, of course, that all FIs would like one AI solution, one package, and the data to flow through their terminals. They don't want multiple packages, and that's how the AI sort of solutions look in the nature space. It's very fragmented, and you can get one metric here and one metric with another vendor, right?
And so when you just talk about the challenge of AI integration, and you identified one of the challenge, and that is multiple metrics and multiple input and all that. So do you see any other challenges around this? And also if you are tasked to just bring solutions, bring ideas to the regulator and also to the corporates, and how those AI integration related challenge can be addressed?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. There are multiple challenges, and I think one of them is especially the missing data set of being able to really link your Earth observation data to an asset. You can do that now, an observable physical asset like a mine, etc., and you can automatically assess a number of the nature-related risks, but linking that to a corporate family ownership structure is quite difficult. We just had the problems with the ships, who owns which vessels, how can we link that to a stock exchange and to a listed equity to ascribe that risk? It is quite challenging. We don't have a system that really works well for international corporate family trees and ownership structures. So I think that's a real challenge that is out there, definitely. And then I think just the fact that the regulatory texts are so massive, I think just for the ESG analysts that are trying to package these Article 9 and 8 funds under the SFDR, which are those that have either a sustainability purpose or where sustainability is part of the fund, that is a massive bureaucratic job to actually screen all the companies, all their economic activities, and figure that out. So I think with this whole sort of coming online of large language models, I think one thing that would be so super helpful, and it is early days, some fintechs are trying to look into it, is how can we help ESG analysts to actually be able to navigate? I mean, the EU taxonomy is 550 pages plus and more coming, let alone then you have the SFDR and all the others. How can you quickly, how can you train LLMs on these types of regulatory requirements, so that you as an ESG analyst do not have to spend time navigating text, but that you can actually do your job of quantifying risks, etc. And then with time, be able to engage with the disclosures, be able to ask the LLM, can you compare emissions to water between this and this company, because I want to make a decision, and this is the most important risk for me, or that at that point in time that would come. I think that would be hugely helpful. Definitely.
Got it. And yeah, what you shared, a lot of examples are at the industry level, right? And I don't know whether, this is you can share, or such information is available. And if you just, go down one level from the industry level to the corporate level and see that, do you see any specific example that, this FI, or that asset manager, or that company which leveraged the AI and then solved some core challenge within their sustainable finance, no matter through the risk management or asset management? So do you see any specific example at the corporate level? So if anyone who want to just be inspired by, then they can just dive deep into some of those core examples.
Yeah, I think one use case that is super interesting is definitely Rabobank and their biodiversity link credit to farmers, where they have used automation to track some of the performance. So that is around sort of, if the farmers use less pesticides, less nutrients, they can get an interest rate rebate. And the whole idea for Rabobank is then they launched a carbon bank a few years ago, is as the farmer is incentivized to use less fertilizer and pesticides, then they will start to build up carbon in the soil, because the carbon, or the soil, will be better at sequestering carbon. And then the whole idea with the carbon bank is then to be able to link the clients that has soil carbon with the corporates that's made net zero commitments, and then really be that marketplace. So Rabobank to be that marketplace in the voluntary carbon market, for instance. So I think that is an interesting use case. Then there are quite many, and it's much more mature in because what's really sort of the new part of the regulation on climate is really that it's becoming mandatory to report on your scope 3 emissions. And a lot of the scope 3 emissions, which is in supply chains, so it can also be your finance, the clients of your finance clients, right? Which is quite complicated. But with open banking infrastructure, what we've seen is that a number of banks have started to use automated tools to be able to issue green bonds to SMEs in their scope 3. So really because we have because the carbon space, or the carbon emission space, is so relatively mature, and we have the GHG protocol, and we have the the ways to convert an expenditure in a sector to a carbon footprint, that they've just used AI to automatically look at your expenditures as an SME and then ascribe your carbon footprint. And it doesn't matter that it's not completely accurate, right? It still gives you a picture of where you're most carbon intensive in your business. Where could we have a credit to you that would have a KPI that's linked to transition? So I think that's super interesting, as some of these credits that are linked to green KPIs and AI to some degree being part of that solution.
Thank you. Yeah, that's, I think, is a very good example. And you know, anyone who will know you and then understand that you have been involved in many of the high-level policy dialogue, you know, like G20 and all that. And you know, how do you envision that AI shaping the future of sustainable finance policy on a global scale?
Yeah, I think at a global scale, that definitely this the fact that I mean, one of the sort of bigger ones at the global scale at the moment, in the aftermath of that, we in December of last year got the Global Biodiversity Framework Agreement, right? So we got a Paris type agreement on nature. So one of the big sort of financing instruments coming in the back of that is the debt for nature swaps. So it's basically those states that are highly indebted, that where the creditors come together and say, we're going to give you debt relief, but what you save on paying us back your debt, you're going to put that into a fund, and you're going to then protect a bigger part of your area. So you're going to deliver on the agreement. So you're going to protect those 30%. So there's been a few of these swaps that's been really, really interesting. And I think one way to sort of leverage AI is that I think we're definitely going to see is to bring the transparency to, well, is this area then being protected, right? Can we monitor it from the eye in the sky to see that the debt for nature swap is actually working? Because a lot of these highly indebted countries are some of the poorest countries in the world. So for the creditors to go together to actually do that, and I think that's going to be happening much more at the sort of G7, those types of levels, that we're going to see them work together and leverage AI to have that sort of almost like that third-party neutral monitoring and assessment that this state is actually living up to. So I think in the sovereign space, we're going to see a lot of that, and we're going to see more and more of these sovereign sustainability-linked loans that we have seen a few of, with more and more climate and nature-related indicators, which I think on reforestation, for instance, square kilometers of reforestation happening in the Brazil as a condition for them to issue a or get financing for a sustainability-linked sovereign bond. And I think there we're definitely going to see AI being deployed much more in the sovereign space. And I think we're going to see states come together globally to agree on these frameworks to actually be able to do that. I think the big one to crack, as we talked about before, which we've also submitted some papers to on G20, is exactly on linking asset geolocation data to company ownership, and being able to share that across borders in a way that doesn't jeopardize the commercial strategy of the company. So how can we do that in ways that doesn't reveal too much? Is it encryption? What is it? Is it sort of data networks? I think that's one of the, we did a bigger paper on a biodiversity data platform, which was exactly that, and we presented it to the G20. But of course, it touches on commercial strategy, geopolitics. A lot of countries don't want to reveal, of course, the links between their assets and company ownership or state ownership. For us to be able to really leverage AI to automatically assess the physical or nature-related risks associated with it. So I think that's a conversation to be had, and maybe it will be cracked, maybe it won't, we'll see.
Yeah, and I really like the instrument that you just shared with us, and at really the policy level, just the instrument as the DAS swap and all that can really play that a much bigger role and in this space where that naturally that's where that in those low capacity countries, and then they do need help, right? And then, but from the financing side, that's where does that finance come from? And I think, to identify those existing resources which can be just pulled into the sustainability ecosystem service and all that, that I think really, show the power of financial instrument. And again, that's to bring those financial instruments into real reality, and then AI and other emerging technology will, and be able to play a increasingly important role. And as you mentioned about this data study, and I think that itself is part of the pie, right? And then if you want to apply the tool, you have to first agree with what can be shared, and then to figure out in general, that is beyond the sensibility or beyond ecosystem, where that's applying AI or artificial intelligence in solving significant problem. And then this is a real negotiation. It's a social negotiation, and this need to happen at the broader level between citizens and the government, between corporate with the regulator, and also amongst regulator themselves, because it does really create a lot of very interesting new rights and new concerns, and also new benefits, and which yet to be fully understood. And my last question for you is really around responsible AI, and also around the the untapped areas that you see that AI can play a role in the next 10 or 20 years, and then those potential are yet to be tapped.
Yeah, I think we've just scratched the surface. That I said in the beginning, really AI to go into sustainable finance was slower than to get into mainstream finance, because the data layer is not structured, and it's been complicated to automate sustainability information, but that's coming. So I think we're very early stage in that transition. I think currently there's so much focus on using AI for disclosure, which is fine, right? Which is good. But we also need much more innovation, and where there's really untapped potential is in the financial instruments and innovating new types of financial instruments, just as you said. And most of the high biodiversity countries are in the global south, right? They're in poor countries, and they have high risk ratings, high perceived risk, high real risk, and they can't really attract capital into these nature assets. So I think really being able to structure digital bonds, so blockchain enabled bonds on some of these nature assets, forestry assets, etc., and also to package them in ways, because some of these assets will have a business model around them, like a plantation, and you can completely structure a bond around that with a return, etc. But then there will be an asset which needs to rewild, so it will have no business model. So finding ways where we can package assets so that we can give to investors an average of the yield between the two, or that the rewilding asset with time can start to sell off biodiversity credits and get a value stream, but that will take time. So I think starting to look at these smaller digital bonds, because of the fact that most of high biodiversity is in countries with low or fragile governance, and also because of the fact that most nature assets are too small to be interesting to sort of traditional capital markets. So being able to structure these types of bonds and also issue them locally, or package the assets in through automation, by using AI, but also satellite data, to be able to actually design a track record on some of these assets. Because one of the problems also with nature assets is that they're so not known to the financial world as an asset class, and they don't have a historical track record. How do they perform? Not really proper insurance policies around it, etc. But with satellite data, etc., it's actually possible to design a historical track record around a forest, around a piece of land. How has it been performing? So we can actually try to model how it will perform in the future. So I think that whole sort of financial engineering and using digital and tech to take out some of that perceived and real risk, and for investors to be able to leverage AI to follow it. And then I think on the responsible side, I think that's so important. And also because of the fact, if we start to monetize and invest in nature like that, we need to be really sure that it's not owned by someone else that doesn't have proper titles to it, etc. That we just allow companies to go in, for instance, and buy carbon credits or biodiversity credits off a land which is owned by some community somewhere. So I think responsible AI really need to have that human scrutiny as part of it when we set it up, to make sure we have the legal ownership structures and also the benefit sharing around when we do design carbon credits or biodiversity credits, that those that are actually caring for them locally get a part of what's there, and it's not just monetized by an agency that's able to put in all the third-party verification and all those upfront costs and develop the projects. So I really think responsible AI needs to hold the hand of a human in these areas, definitely. Yeah, so I think I'll stop here.
Perfect. And do you plan to go to COP28, or do you have a plan?
Potentially, because one of the big focus areas of COP28 will be on food system transformation. And because the food system sort of plays the equivalent role to the nature transition as the energy system does to climate. So it is the most material sector. We need to change how we eat. We need to change how we produce food. Otherwise, we're not going to reverse the biodiversity crisis, right? So there's a lot of focus on food system transformation. So I may be going. I'll keep you updated, and I hope you are going. Are you going?
Yes, and I'm working with the UNFCCC to launch a Building to Trillion Climate Alliance, which is basically trying to identify those financial instruments which can enable the need-based climate mitigation actions in different link that with the core human needs, including the nutrition, including shelter, and all that. And I think what you mentioned could be really interesting. I have a session there, and then for the alliance, and maybe if you plan to go, and then we would love to have you to join that conversation as well. Yeah.
Oh, I would love to. I'll definitely keep you posted, and thank you so much for that invitation. Always a pleasure.
Awesome, thank you. And I learned a lot from this conversation. I hope that others can also just benefit from this conversation by understand that ecosystem or nature-based finance and green finance, sustainable finance, no matter what category you use, but this area or this field is extremely important, and that's just really significant in terms of to connect the biggest problem that we humans are facing, and with the right financial instrument together, and then to generate the benefits that will impact everyone's life. And then there a lot of innovation can happen. AI can play a very important role, and so does other emerging technologies. And we do have a lot of things need to happen at the policy level, at the asset manager level, at the corporate level, also at citizen level. And then this is, as what you mentioned, that we just at the starting point to have a much bigger conversation. I'm happy that hopefully this conversation also just bring others into this beginning, and then start thinking together as the problem solver, and what will be the next step, and how everyone can contribute. Thank you again, and looking forward to continue this conversation.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you.